Hello, class. We are in chapter 8 using arrays. So I am going to give you an overview of chapter 8 as to how to create arrays and go over the chapter 8 lab so that you can kind of have an idea of the code that you'll be writing for that and understanding how it actually works. Now, when you are thinking about an array, what I want you to think about is an array of items of the same type. So far you have been able to create variables that will hold one single value. But when you're dealing with an array can hold several values of the same type. So say, for example, you have 10 integers and you want to store them in an array, you can store all 10 in that particular array. And that array becomes an object of integer values. You can also store, so in your examples provided in Canvas, a couple YouTube videos I uploaded, most of them, and I think all of them are using strings, but I just want you to know or make note that you can actually create arrays of whatever data type that you like. So you can have strings, integers, chars, decimal, double, whatever the case may be. Most of the time, for the assignments in this class, you'll likely have integers, doubles, or strings, but strings are like the most common. So so for this particular chapter, we're just going to look at arrays, and we're also going to look at for loops to traverse your array, because remember there are multiple values inside of the array. So to make it more efficient, you would use a loop to actually traverse or access each item, each element in your array. Okay, so let's move on towards this particular portion. So we've talked about what an array is, and that each array or whatever array you create can hold different items. Those different items are referred to as elements. So if you hear me or someone use the term element, that means you're referring to the actual value that's inside of your array. Now, because you can have multiple values inside of the array, you have to use an index or a subscript to determine which value in the array that you want to access, that you want to print, or you want to change, or you want to modify it, whatever the case may be. So when you create an array of items, they all will have its very own index or subscript. And you'll notice here, we have an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items, but you will notice the index ends with a 5. That's because whenever you are creating an array, you will always begin the index at 0 and count up, okay? So 0 offsets it. So now I'm storing 6 values. I'm storing 9.0 in location 0. 11.5 in location 1, okay? So, and forth and so on. So that is how you will actually store those multiple values, and that is how you will actually be able to refer to an element inside of the array. Okay, let's look at the syntax a little bit more here. All right, so notice here the syntax for creating an array. Here we have the dim. Of course, you're used to initializing your statements using dim. Then int indicates the type of data that's going to go in the array. And then reservations is just basically the name of the array. So you're still using similar criteria that you've used before for your variables, okay? But now what goes with this particular name is parentheses, a set of parentheses. And inside of that parentheses, you will indicate the size of your array, which means how many elements I want this array to store. So this particular one here is passing 300. Most of the your programs are going to be, of course, much less. and then your as, and then the integer, whatever the name of the data type it is, okay? So here, notice how you can actually go ahead and initialize an array. So here we're declaring an array, we're defining our array. So when you write a statement like this, the array isn't filled yet. It's just filled with the default value of 0, which for integers, the default value is 0. For doubles, it'll be 0.0. For strings, it'll be null, so forth, okay? So this is a declaration. You're just basically defining an array. So you're allocating space for 300 different elements. So nothing stored in this array is just have been defined. But say you have values that you already know that you want to go inside of your array, and you want to go ahead and initialize your array. So this will be the syntax: dim, the type, the name of the array, open and close parentheses, and they notice that they are empty, okay? At this point, you'll leave it empty, and once you add the items that you want to go in your array, the program will automatically determine what your size is, what's the size of your array. So open and close parentheses as string, equal sign, and know the curly braces, all right? Curly brace, and then you are storing different strings. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're storing 5 different strings, okay? And Baker is in location 0, Lopez is in location 1, Buck is in location 2. So if I wanted to reference Lopez, I would use location 1, okay? It's still set up the same way as we discussed, okay? Same here with integers. You will set it up the same way, indicate the type, leaving open, leaving your parentheses empty, and then go ahead and initialize it to what values you want it to be. Notice that during the initialization, you are separating each element by a comma, all right? So you have to separate them by a comma, and notice that you have the curly braces here, which are indicating that this is an array and you're wanting these values to be stored there, okay? Many times you would deal with parallel arrays, which means the data that's stored in each array is related. Okay, so here you have a name array and a reservations array. So the name here in location 0, Baker, is related to reservations 4. So Baker has 4 reservations, all right? These are 2 separate arrays, but if you wanted to maybe print Baker and the number of reservations he or she has, then you would basically use the name of this particular array and the index, and then this particular array and its index. They're still 2 separate array objects, but the data that's inside of these arrays are related in such a way. So that's kind of like when you're looking at a spreadsheet or you're dealing with different information about yourself. Although you have all these different values or different types of information, majority of all of it, your social security number, your birthday, your address, all that information are different types, but it's still related to each other. It's related to that one person, you, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind as you're creating several different arrays, okay? Now notice whenever you're wanting to access any element inside of your array, you're gonna use a loop. The reason being is because loops are iterating over and over, so it'll traverse your array as opposed to you attempting to write separate statements one by one to access each item. That would be redundancy, and it will make your program inefficient, okay? So here we're creating an array of integers that's going to hold. Now, it says 31, but remember that the last index would be 30. It would still hold the 31 values, but the last index would be 30 because 0 offsets it, okay? So now we want to actually traverse this particular array. So we're using a for loop. Most of the time you're going to use for loops, even in other languages, to traverse an array. However, you can create while loops to do the same, but in this particular language, I believe that The while loops are a little bit more difficult. But if you understand the concept of them, you can totally use them. But I recommend using a for loop instead, okay? So now we have our for loop, and then remember you have to have your initialization. This is gonna be your counter variable. Now, this variable here that you initialize is going to be used as your index in the array. So this is going to allow you to traverse the actual array, okay? So for int days equals 0. So we're gonna start at index 0. All right, and we're gonna count up to 30 because we know that the last index is gonna be 30 instead of 31. All right, so now int days equals 0. So the first iteration is going to print into the lowest temperature on January. And then here, notice int days plus 1. So int days is 0. So we're gonna add 1 to make it 1. So now you're gonna tell it to enter the lowest temperature on January 1st, all right? And then it's going to come here, int daily temperature January, which is basically the name of your array here. And then now you're using the index, all right? Int days, all right? So int days is 0. So inside of my array in location 0, I wanna convert that value that's inside of my array, I want to convert it to an integer, all right? So notice string temp here is holding the input from the user, right? And we know that any input that the user, any input from the user will be stored as a string, okay? But our array that we created here is an integer type. So in order for us to store that value that the user entered, we have to first convert it, all right? So you have to make sure that the data or the element that you're attempting to store in your arrays are matching. Data types have to match, all right? So you can't store a string inside of an integer array. So now you're converting that particular value that the user entered, you're converting it to an integer, and then it's gonna store it inside of your array. Now, your next iteration, so 0 becomes 1, right? So now 1 plus 1 equals 2. So now enter the lowest temperature on January 2nd. And the same thing here. In location 2, in index 2, I want to take whatever value the user just entered and I want to convert it and I want to store it in my array. So this is you basically traversing your array and storing a value there, all right? So this is an example of using a for loop to traverse an array, okay? Inside of Visual Basic, it works a little different. Some of you probably have taken me for Java, which you know your arrays work a little different. But in this particular language, you can resize your array, all right? You can resize your array. They're more dynamic in this particular language. You can also preserve an existing array where if you don't want to get rid of the original values, so whatever it is in that particular array, you can preserve it, okay? All right, so suppose sometimes you're not always sure what the size of your array needs to be or whatever the case may be. There is a property called length that you can actually use. I'm trying to recall if we've used length in this class yet, but length will just basically grab the length of something. So it'll return a value, all right? So string branch offices is your array here. You've defined it here. And here, this is a label that's just gonna print the size of that array. The array size is, so the name of the array dot length, and it'll just print the size of the array, how many elements are in the array, all right? So length can be used to get the length of your array. So whenever you're using your for loop to traverse your array, you can use it here as well. So in the previous example, you saw that the 31, I think it had 31 there. No, it had 30 there. But in this case, instead of having an actual value here, we're going to use the length property to grab the size of my array. So int year, which is the name of my array, dot length is going to return the size of that array. Notice the -1. The reason is because when you're incrementing or you're traversing your array, sometimes it can end up going out of bounds, attempting to go one extra time, because we would get thrown off because of the 0 offsetting it. So length -1 will make sure that it goes 99 minus 1, which is 98, which we've indicated because of the 0, we will always be 1 less than whatever number is here. So length -1. So length would return 99, -1 is 98, so it'll count up to 98, ensuring that we don't go out of bounds, okay? And notice how if you wanted to, you can still use it to access values, and you can use this counter variable however you like. So here int year is the name of the array, int count. Remember that this particular variable is representing your index. So in year and location 0, I want to store 2001 plus int count. So int count is 0, so it'll just store 2001, and then and so forth. It'll just continue going forward, okay? It'll continue increasing. This here is just another example. I don't think I need to walk through it because it's similar to, okay, I will walk through this. We just completed cumulative sum variables where you're dealing with your compound assignment operator. So you can also sum up values that are inside of an array. So int total is our cumulative sum variable that's going to keep track of every value inside of the array and add them all up. Okay, so int total, which is the variable that we created here, that's going to add up and sum up all the values. And then plus or equal here, which you remember is our compound assignment operator. Int year salary, all right, is the name of our array. So int year salary, int add, which represents our counter here, is going to basically take whatever value is in int year salary and location 0 and add it. All right, so 0 is where we begin, and whatever the salary is going to add it to it and store it back into int total. And the next iteration is just going to basically continue adding on each salary that's stored in the array. So now we're in iteration 1, and it's going to take whatever's located in this salary array in location 1 and add it. All right, so this particular loop is going to stay here and continue adding up all the values inside of your array. And then once it gets to the end of your array, this loop will terminate, and then it'll move into the remainder portion of your program. Now, the thing is to remember, arrays can be pretty much used similar to your variables that you've been using. The only difference is now this particular array holds way more values, and if I want to access any of them, I would have to use the name of the array in its index, okay? You can also take the contents of an array and add them to a list box, which we'll do that in this particular program, and in one of the example YouTube videos I posted, it showed you an example there as well. But let's just look at int field starts at 0. Remember, it's always going to start at 0, and it's going to count up to the length of your array -1. And here we have our list box, and we want to add items, and then we're just grabbing whatever is in my array, int string item ID, int field, which is location 0. Whatever is in that array, I want to add it to my list box. So you're taking whatever's in your array and you're adding it to your list box, okay? We're gonna look at that a little bit more in the chapter 8 lab. We've already talked about for loops, regular loops. Now you have the for each enhanced loop, all right? This particular loop here allows you to just go ahead and examine each item in your array, all right? You wouldn't use this necessarily for making changes or anything. This one just takes whatever's inside of the array and prints it because it does not use a counter, all right? So you wouldn't look at it from that standpoint, especially if you wanted to make changes, because it doesn't use a counter variable to look at the index or anything like that. It looks at the contents, the element in the array instead, okay? So your for each loop. So notice here, we have an array here. I mean, we have a list box here that hold different items. And then we have here where we're just adding, you hear just adding space, so don't stress about that. So string pioneer here is a string that we are, oh, okay. I'm forgetting what we're doing. So remember, your for each only looks at the contents of your array, all right? So depending on what your contents are, that's what this particular variable will be, all right? So the array that we're looking at holds a string, right? It holds different strings. So because we're looking at each item, you're gonna have a variable here of type string, which was declared here, dim string pioneer as string. It was defined, declared here, nothing was stored there, because it's going to be used as our temporary variable as we're traversing our list, all right? And traversing our array. And so for each string value, so let's just look at it like that. For each string value, we're taking whatever's in my array. For each string value in my array, so whatever the name of your array is, all right, this is my array. We've already initialized it to hold values. So for each string value in my array, I want to take it and add it to my list box. So list items, pioneers items.add is going to pass string pioneer, because string pioneer now holds the element that's in my array, the first element. All right, and now we're moving to the next iteration. So notice it's not using any counter variable, it's just accessing the actual content of the array. So the second iteration is now gonna grab Babbage, all right, and store it inside of string pioneer, and it's gonna pass it as a parameter here to add, and add it to your list box. Now we're ready for the next iteration. So Ada is gonna be stored in string pioneer from our array, and it's going to be added to our list box, and so forth. Okay, so the for each is just used to print items of your array, not to make any changes. Okay, now remember, your arrays work the same way as your variables. Your array has to be declared where you want to use it. So you will either declare the array inside of it a procedure where it will only exist inside of that procedure, or you can declare a class level variable that will be accessible globally, which means you can use it anywhere inside of that particular class program, okay? So here, this will be the syntax of declaring a class level array. So notice here, you have the underscore, the type, the name, and then the size, all right, as string. So you can declare it at class level, which means now you can access this particular string wherever you want, and make changes to it and so forth, okay? So in chapter 7, we talked about procedures. We looked at sub and function, so you guys should remember the name, remember the difference. Of course, sub does not return a value, function does. In this particular one, you have a compute display sub procedure that's passing an array as a parameter. So decimal val of commission, notice there is no particular size given here, because here you're just basically defining that you're gonna pass it in array, and once you pass it, that will determine the size of that array, what that size will be. All right, so here you're just, remember that you're just declaring here what, or defining here in this header what will be passed, and this is going to receive an array, and you're passing by value. Please refer back to your I don't remember what chapter it was, but the difference between by val and by reference. Remember, by val is not going to change the original contents, but when you pass by reference, it changes the original contents, okay? Because reference is just referencing the location, not the actual value. When you're doing by val, it's going to be looking at each of those values particularly, okay? So now you're calling this method here, I mean, not method, this is Visual Basic, but you're calling this procedure here, and you're passing it the array. So you've already declared the array here inside of this sub procedure. So it begins here, ends here. You've declared it, initialized it to hold different values, and now you're calling this particular procedure, and you're wanting to pass it to that particular procedure. So now you're passing this array. Now that array is now accessible here. So now you've passed decimal commission amounts array here. So now the contents of that array here is now stored inside a decimal value of commission here, okay? And now, because this is what you declared inside of this particular procedure, now anything that you want to do pertaining to this particular array, you will use the decimal value of commission, all right? And all we're wanting to do is take the values that is inside of the array and total them up. So you have a decimal total, which is basically going to be your cumulative sum variable. So you're using the for each loop, so for each decimal amount. So notice that your array is type decimal. So here you're going to go ahead and have a decimal amount. You're going to have a variable here that's going to hold a decimal in your array. Take that value, whatever that value is, add it to total, and it's going to continue to do that until this loop terminates. There is a procedure called sort that'll sort an array for you. It'll put the values in order for you. So if you you type array dot sort and pass it the name of the array that you want it to sort, it'll sort the values for you. These are other procedures. We don't really end up using them, but just to know that it actually has a couple procedures that you can use. So a binary search is just basically you're going to search an array for a particular value. So for this particular procedure, array dot binary search, and you're going to pass the name of the array and the value that you want it to search for inside of that array. All right. So it will return a positive number or 0 if it does find a match. All right. So, however, if it does not find that value in that array, it'll return a negative number. We're not going to worry about two-dimensional arrays. We're not going to do much. We're not going to use those in this particular one. But we will be reading text files. So now your program will be reading data from a text file, and most of the programming languages that you deal with, you end up using text files because it's cleaner. But in order for us to actually be able to read a file, we have to set up our program to utilize our stream reader class library. All right. So system.io, you already know that means input output. All right, so now we're wanting to use stream reader to allow us to basically read our text file. Now, because this particular this class library is embedded in the language, it already has procedures set up. It already has pre-written code to basically perform whatever task we need it to perform, okay? So here, however, whenever you're wanting to use anything within a class library that's already pre-built or built in, you have to create an object of that particular class. This is where you're looking at object-oriented programming. So here, input output stream writer is going to be the object that we're going to create. So object reader is creating that connection between my program and the stream reader class. All right. So now that means I have access to those procedures inside of the stream reader class. Okay. So now what happens is, we're going to go over this a little bit more when I show you a demo, but input output file that exists is just basically checking to make sure that your program actually exists. All right. Now, once it finds that that actual file exists, now your object reader will allow you to open that text file. So the input output class here, where you're looking at the system input output, has a open text procedure that you're wanting access to. And open text just basically passes the name of the file that you want it to open. So this will be the name of the file that you wanted to open. Now, quick tip. It's important that you save your file to directly on your USB, if it's an E drive, F drive, colon, and then slash, and then the name of the file. Because if you do not, you would have to include the entire directory path, and you don't want to do that because it always creates errors. The directory path is always too deep. So just keep it simple and save it directly to your USB, or you can make sure that it's actually inside of your, I thought I had the file on mine, but I don't. Or you can just have it inside of your folder. All right. Now, whenever you have it inside of your project as one of your resources, so you can just use the name of the file, inventory.txt. Okay. But this portion here is very important so that it'll open your file. Now, once you have opened the file, now you want to set up your program to read that text file. Now, what there is peek procedure. Peek will basically search your file to make sure there is data there. There is some type of information there. All right. So object reader is to remember is the object that you created of the system.io stream reader. All right. So now object reader.peek, as long as it's not equal to -1, this will continue. All right. So once it equals -1, that means there's nothing else there. So I'm done, and it moves on with the rest of its program. All right. So the important part is notice that you're using a do while loop. So you're going to use this do while. So as long as there's data inside of your text file, it's going to continue reading it. All right. Now, the key thing is you have to make sure that when you're reading your text file is that it's in the appropriate order. All right. So I'm going to come here. Inventory. So this is the text file that we're going to be reading. And it's going to be reading it line by line. Notice read line. That means read the full line. All right. So it's going to read it line by line. Now you have to indicate what you wanted to do with each types of data. So notice that it has an inventory. It has the name of the item. It has like the inventory, the ID. It has how much it costs and how many we have in stock, the quantity. All right. So each of these are different items. All right. So the first one here, what it's going to do, the first iteration is going to grab the string inventory. I make sure you have the appropriate type. All right. Now, these are arrays. I don't know if you remember them from the class level, what we created, but these are the arrays that you have created. And now what you're telling it is, I want you to read the information from my text file, and I want you to store it in my array. All right. So string inventory item is going to hold the name of the inventory item. So it's going to grab this full line. Remember, I told you read line grabs the whole line. So object reader dot read line allows us to grab the whole line. It grabs it and it stores it in my very first location in my inventory item ID, inventory item array. All right. Now, because it grabbed that full line and there's nothing else there, it's going to move to the next line. All right. The next line is my item ID, right? And so it's going to take that item ID and store it inside of my item ID array. All right. Notice read line. There's nothing else there. So now it automatically moves on to the next line. This is the cost. It's a type of, it's a decimal. So here we're going to store it in our decimal initial price array. But notice that you're converting it to a decimal because everything that's being read by read line is reading it as a string. All right. So if it's not a string and you want it to be the actual value that you want to use, you will have to convert it. So here you're wanting to convert this string here, 1599.99 to a decimal. So convert that to decimal and you're just basically passing object reader.read line. So once it reads that line, take it, convert it, and now store it inside of my initial price array. All right, read the last line, last thing on the line. So now I want to grab the quantity. Quantity is a string right now, so I need to convert that as well. So my quantity array is going to hold my string, hold my integer value. So now convert that to int32 is going to convert that 12 to an integer value. All right, now we're done with the last item, that with all of its contents. So now the loop comes back around, right? And notice your int counter plus equals 1. Remember, you're traversing your arrays, so your index has to change. So this is updating your index. So plus equal 1 means now we're in index 1 because we started in index 0, storing everything, storing all these items in index 0 of all of our arrays, each different array. Now we're ready to store index 1. So all of these items will be stored in index 1. All right, plus equal 1. Now we're in index 2. So the next iteration, we're ready to store these items in index 2. All right, so it continues to move on. The key thing is, please walk through this so you can see how it's reading each one line by line, how it's making this possible. And then once you get to this last item, it'll come to this last one and notice that there's nothing else here to read. And so it'll exit this loop. Okay. And then notice we're just closing it. I know that was a lot, but hopefully it was helpful and you were able to understand what I was saying. I think most of this is just code and how to calculate depreciation. We're gonna look at the code here. Yeah, so we're gonna just come over here and look at the code for a second. All right, so this is the GUI that you're gonna create at the end of chapter 8. Make sure you follow the steps completely. Notice everything is pretty much everything that you've been using. You have a menu strip here, you have a list box here, you have a group box here, and you have radio buttons here. You got a button, you got labels everywhere, and you got other list boxes, all right? You also have here a second form. So this particular chapter is introducing how you can use multiple forms, more than one form. So notice over here, we now have 2 different forms that we've created. So you'll see now you have 2 different forms, but they're, basically gonna be toggled between one and the other. And this particular form has a list box and a button. It doesn't have a whole lot of data or information there. So Now, let's just look at some of the code. We kind of looked at it as we were looking through the slides, but just to kind of point out some stuff, these here are your class level variables here, your public shared. So this value is being publicly shared. You're making this particular array, these arrays here private to this particular class, but you're able to access everything. Your class in this, the procedures in this particular class are able to access them. All right, so you have your form. So you notice as your form loads, so remember this is what I want to happen when my form loads. So automatically it's going to read your file. You're setting it up to read your text file. Now, I'm not gonna walk through all this one by one because your guided portion at the end of your textbook does a better job as to being a little bit more descriptive. So make sure you're reading through it as you are completing it and understanding it so that you're able to complete your programming assignment, okay? All right, so remember it's checking to see if the file exists. If the file exists, it's gonna open it. However, if the file does not exist, it gives us this error message box here, okay? And you'll have to make sure that the file is in the right place. Usually if you get a file error where it doesn't find the file, you have it saved in a location where you didn't indicate the correct directory path here. So that'll be usually the reason why. And so this just goes into the text that I walked you through, where the do while loop is basically traversing your text file and retrieving the data from the text file and storing it into your arrays, okay? Now, also, you can also take the information that's in the array and put it in a list box, which we've looked at that a couple of times. Here is using a for loop, which is basically taking the inventory items that's inside of your inventory, your item ID, taking the item ID inside of your array and storing it inside of your inventory, your inventory list box. Sorry. So it's adding the items from your item ID array to your list box. That's what your program is going to do as it loads. And then here, this is what we want to happen when we click the calculate button. So this here is just based on what you select. So you should be comfortable now with your if and if else statements. And here, what you're looking at, list inventory ID selected index, is just basically ensuring that the user has selected something from this inventory box is greater than or equal to 0. So it's 0 more. If it's negative, that means nothing was selected, and then it'll give you an error, okay? Once you've made your selection, notice that it's taking that index, whatever the index of whatever you selected, and it's storing it inside of select item ID, all right? And then now that will determine whether what you're going to calculate. You click the radio button for a straight line, and then it'll send that index for that particular item that you selected and calculate the straight line depreciation. Or if you selected the radio button double declining, it's gonna show you the declining depreciation. The key thing to take from this is you have two different procedures that have been created here. Both are passing and integer, right? And that means when they come to that particular procedure, so that procedure is being created. It's like your very own procedure that you've created. It's passing an integer, and you're basically following several different steps to go ahead and calculate depreciation. I believe that as you read through it and look through it a little bit more, and just looking at this, you can pretty much read what's happening, because all of these steps are just pretty much everything we've talked about up until this point. The key thing is just making sure that you're understanding what you're looking at, okay? And then notice that we have the double declining depreciation procedure here, which is also performing a particular calculation based on the value that was passed, right? And then make object visible is also a procedure that has been created to just basically make your objects visible, whatever it is that you want to be seen. And I'll show you why in a second, because when your form loads, all of your objects won't be visible. So you can create a procedure that will actually take care of that for you. And then you have your clear click, which is a part of your menu strip, which is basically going to clear out everything and reset everything. And then you have your exit. All right, so if we look at this, we debug it. You'll notice that all of your objects are not visible. You have to make a selection first. So if I click the calculate, I get the error message because I didn't select anything. All right, so now I'm going to select an item, inventory. Remember, these are the inventory items we added. So if we pull this up, D208, your A101, let's scroll up, your A101. So these are the inventory items that we added, all right? So when I click D208, I'm basically selecting the ID of my stored display racks, all right? And I want it to calculate the double declining balance, then calculate, and you'll see here that now it's made all of my other objects visible. It's gonna show the year and how what its depreciation is, the present year, the present value of it, and then by year, and then the total depreciation, all right? And then if we clear it out, it clears out everything and allows us to do it all over again. So notice here, I can come here and select F311. If you recall that the last one here is sofas, the F311. And then let's do the straight line depreciation, and it just basically calculates the depreciation. So if we exit out of there and come here, oh, I forgot to show, I'll go back and show you in a second. But if you come here, you'll notice that there's a value, there's a expression here where I was set up to basically calculate the depreciation. So that's why the values are different, because there are expressions inside that are calculating the depreciation. Oh, so that you'll see the other, so display inventory, if you click that, this is your other, if you notice, this is our other form that we created. And it just lists the list of inventory items. So if you'll notice here, it's the store display racks, the point of sale registers, the mannequins, and all of that. So you just have all of the items just that was inside of that's inside of your spreadsheet. I mean, not your spreadsheet, your text file has been added. And then you can return to your application and you can finish doing what you want to do. So maybe you don't know what these items are, what you're doing, or what items they have. You can actually just display, oh, that's what, you know, these are the items that they have. That's all this is set up to do, is just show you an example of toggling between different forms, okay? All right, that completes chapter 8. Hopefully you have a good idea of what you're putting together in chapter 8. So good luck, you guys, and let me know, let myself or your tutor know if you have any questions.